Hey guys, today I'm going to talk about how to make the AI videos that you're seeing pop up everywhere on social lately. New AI video tools are coming out every day, it seems like, and they're all always the latest and the best, so it seems really difficult to know which one to use for each case. So in this video, I'm going to review a bunch of the most common AI models that we see in video these days and see how they stack up against each other. So there's a bunch of different AI models, and each have their pluses and minuses, and there's also different services to use these models. The main thing that they all kind of have in common is that you need to subscribe to get a certain amount of tokens from them every month, and then use up those tokens for your generations. So I get that it can be overwhelming to not know which service is best for you. Some of the main services out there that you might have heard about are Runway, which has a bunch of different tools for image generation, as well as image background removal and a bunch of stuff. You also have Pika Labs, which has its own different ways of doing stuff where you can add different effects. And the one that I use the most is Kriya. It also has a lot of different tools, kind of like Runway, but not as many as they have. But the reason I like using Kriya is because when you go into generating video, you'll see here that I have a big drop down of different models that are currently in the market that I can use to generate my video. I've put together some examples of what the exports look like with the name of the model and the size at which it generates video, as well as the different frame rates that you can get from each model. And last but not least is Sora, which we've heard a lot about, and I always see great examples from Sora. All the ones that are in their featured page or their top page are very, very beautifully done, and they look great, honestly. But I haven't been able to achieve results quite like this in my generations, and it might be because I'm doing image to video, and a lot of these are usually text to video. The main difference there is, are you generating your video from a prompt that you type in, or are you giving it a reference image to start from? So I'm going to be comparing three different styles today. One is realistic. The other one is more of a 3D toy type animation. And the last one is a little bit more classic anime. And I'm going to be running through with you how I use Kriya AI to create animations using all the different models. And then I'll also compare the results that I get from each model and each different style. So let's jump right in. I'm going to start a new session here. What I like about it is that you have access to all these different models. You don't have access to the very specific tools that some of these models have if you go to their own website, but you can still use a lot of the functionality, and you have access to all the newest and latest that Kriya keeps adding. So you'll see in the drop-down menu that it tells you what functionality each one of these has, and also more or less how long it's going to take to generate each video with one of these. The first one that comes up is Hanyuan, and that one's straight text to video. So I'm not going to use this one today. I have a different video on how to run this model locally that I'll also be releasing here. But just to give you a preview of how this works, basically you add your prompt in here, and you can select your resolution, either 512p or 720p, as well as your aspect ratio. And that's pretty straightforward. We're going to start with high-low, which is the same as Minimax, which you might have also heard. And you'll see that once I select my model, I get a bunch of different options down here. One of them is I can choose how I want my camera to operate in motion, which is really kind of cool. And as you hover over them, you get an example of what that looks like. So say if you had an establishing shot, this upward tilt is usually pretty good. You can also do a tracking shot of a character and a bunch of other different camera movements that you might know. When you select one, it kind of adds it into here. But we're not going to do that right now. Another thing that I can do is add a character. If I want to have a character that's consistent across different scenes, I would choose my character here. And I haven't tested this out yet, but technically what should happen is that my character should remain consistent throughout the different animations. What I am going to use is the start frame, and I'll be using this image that I generated in Midjourney, which, by the way, you can use any image generator that you want, but for me, for ease of use, and when I want something that I know is going to look good, kind of like right off the bat without a lot of edits, or I don't have a specific vision in mind for what I want, then I'll go with Midjourney. So in this case, we have an anime style couple eating noodles outside in a park. I had prompted for inside of a Japanese restaurant, but this is what we got. So we add it here. It's automatically telling you that you have a start frame selected here. And because you already have a start frame, you can't do the character, and you also can't choose the motion. So that's the trade-off with this model, that we can't really select multiple of these options at the same time. And just so I don't have to give this too much thought, I'm going to use the same prompt that I used to create the image for the animation. If I wanted something more specific, like maybe a camera motion, I could type it in here to my prompt, But just keep into account that the more you try to control those things without these functions, the more elements you're giving the AI, and you have a bigger chance of confusing it. So to keep things as easy as possible, I just have my prompt in here, just a Japanese couple in anime style eating noodles in a Japanese restaurant with neon city lights in the background and a cherry blossom tree. So we're going to click generate, which is right here. And then you'll see this little thing appear, and it basically tells you how long each one's going to take, right? So this one's about 5 minutes or 4 minutes, as it gives you a little bit of what it's doing. And you have your progress bar over here. Now, if you have a pro plan, you can also queue several at the same time. In this case, I only have the basic plan, so I'm doing one at a time. I'll come back to this and show you what we got once it finishes. All right, so here's our first result with Halo. And honestly, this model usually gives me pretty good results. So it's kind of funny how it's struggling to make any of these animations. But let's go ahead and also try our other models, right? We have O1 Live, which is also from Halo, or you might know as Minimax. And this one says that it's a high quality model for animating people. So if you have people in your scene, maybe this is the correct one to use. The generation time is a little bit longer, 10 minutes, but with the same prompt that we have here, I'll just queue it up and show you the result when it's done. Okay, so we're back with the O1 Live model, and this one actually didn't take the whole 10 minutes. It was a little bit faster than that for these 5 seconds of animation, and you can see that the motion is actually better. If you compare it to this one just makes a lot more sense, even though, yeah, he's eating his chopsticks instead of the noodles, but hey, it's something. The cool thing as well about Kriya is that you have these buttons here at the bottom, and you can just download your video. You can extend it for another 5 seconds. I don't usually recommend this. Extending AI videos usually generates quite a little bit of wonkiness. And now this other option, add sound, I don't know how long it's been here, but it's kind of cool that you can just click it and it's going to analyze the video and give us a sound that goes with it. We'll see if this was any good or not. So yeah, I have a little bit of background music in there. Pretty cool. Okay, so on to our next model. Here we go using Luma. So here's our result from the Luma model. We're getting some really cool sakura falling around our couple, and even though we have a little bit less movement that we do with other models, this movement makes a lot more sense than trying to stick the back of your chopsticks into your mouth as we've seen before. We also have this Ray 2 model, which is also from Luma, but this one doesn't have the option of image to video, so I'll skip this one for now. And I'll go straight to Runway, which if you use Runway's model on their website, you have extra options to customize what you want to do. Here we just have the options that the Runway API is going to give you, which is going to be give me a start frame and tell me what aspect ratio you want to use. In our case, I'm going to choose landscape. And because I had chosen Ray 2 before that didn't allow for an image, I kind of lost my image that should be down here. But on Kriya, if I just click on any of these right here, it'll populate it back in, because basically I'm saying I want to reuse this image that we created. And if I wanted to copy the prompt, I could just hover over here, click, and it gets copied. But the prompt is still consistent. And this sent us back to Luma, because basically when I clicked on here, I was saying, hey, I want the same type of generation that I had done before. So coming back, let me reselect Runway. This one's a fast and cinematic model. Boom, I have the start frame in there. Let's go. Cool, so this is the Runway model, and I actually really like it. The colors are great. We can see the guy chewing, although he is still kind of bringing the back of the chopstick into his mouth, and her chopsticks are also kind of getting lost. But it looks like she might just be kind of like chatting, and he's chewing with his mouth open, which is not great. But the one thing about Runway is that it won't do square. So it kind of did zoom in into our image, and it did give us a very good result. But this is not the same as the other models that respect the aspect ratio that you have in your image. So we'll talk more about this when we review all of them together. Next one is Kling, and this says it's a great quality model for complex scenes, and it's a 5-minute generation. Here with Kling, you can choose if you want this to be 5 seconds or 10 seconds, as well as give it the starting frame. I'm just going to do 5 for now. And then we have Kling Pro, which is a little bit confusing why we have Kling 1.0, which is Pro, and Kling 1.6. The difference between those isn't made very clear. It sounds like 1.6 should be better than 1.0, but then we have this parentheses Pro. Honestly, I don't know what the difference is. I do know that they give results that are slightly different from one another, and we'll review those as well once I've generated this. As you can see, Pro also has the option of giving a start and an end frame, which Kling 1.6 doesn't. It only has the it only has a start frame. So that's something to keep in mind. Recently, I've been having this issue where when I select one of these models, maybe the API is just bugging out for a little bit, but I click on generate and you can see nothing here is happening. It happened earlier to me today, and then after a few minutes, I came back to it and it was working. This is only happening with both of the Kling models right now, so it just must be something to do with their API. And usually, or at least in my experience, Kriya has been pretty good of bringing this back up pretty quickly. And we're back. Kling is back to being responsive. Kling is on both options, even though this one says 5 minutes and the other one says 10. In my experience, is the one that takes a little bit the longest. But when we get the result, hopefully, because I still haven't animated anything in this anime style with Kling yet, but hopefully we'll see that we get very good results. So far, Kling is one of my favorite models that I've been reviewing. You can see that the progress goes kind of slow, but in all honesty, I think it's worth it. So I'll come back once I've generated Kling 1.6 and 1.0, and we could take a look at the differences and also compare to see how well these models have done with other styles. And last but not least, we have Sora. Now, if you are paying for ChatGPT, then you have access to Sora. The basic $20 a month that you use for ChatGPT will give you a few thousand credits every month for video generation, or if you want higher res generations, then you have to use the Pro account, which is $200 a month. In my opinion, I don't really think that it's worth $200 a month for the results that we're getting, but let me show you how this works. I have all the projects here that I've done, and we'll review these together with the ones that I'm getting from Kriya. So when you get to Sora, you'll see a bunch of different options over here. You'll have your past generations as well. What I can do is I can upload an image or video. So let's choose the anime video that we're doing right now. And then we have a few different presets, which there's no anime preset, so I'm not choosing it from here. As well as I can choose my aspect ratio 1:1 with my image, or I could try and make it landscape, which I actually don't know if this would crop in or generate the sides. We can give that a try in a bit, as well as choosing my resolution and how long I want it to generate. You get Sora as long as you're paying for ChatGPT, but in the basic $20 a month, you're not going to get the option for any of these durations. This is kind of underwhelming for me. When they first announced Sora, and this was already last year, they were talking about how it could create video that was 1 minute long, and it still stayed coherent and everything. But the only options that we have here, as we can see, is up to 20 seconds, and that's if you're paying for the $200 a month. So I guess we're not finding out today how that works. But your other option here, as well as you can choose it to give it 1 video, 2 videos, or 4, I guess, if you're in the higher paid, as well as you can go up to 1080p if you're in the higher paid tier. What's cool about Sora is that it does have this storyboard section where you can click on it and it'll pull up this kind of like timeline where you can have your starting image, and then you can also have a prompt generate part of your image. Or if you had 2 different images that are, say, in the same location or whatever, you can slot them in here and have AI bridge through them. In this case, I only have the one. I'm not going to do it with this extra prompt that Sora has given us. Clearly, it's analyzed the image and seen what's in there. And so it's saying, hey, I'm going to try to see what I could come up with this prompt. But in our case, oh, and I accidentally sent it to the queue. So I guess we are going to find out how well this storyboard function works today, because if you hit create like I did, it's sending it over to the queue. And you can see it's working on the 2 videos, but I also wanted to go back out of storyboard, which I just had to back click and do it in the normal view. So I have my results using the storyboard, and we'll talk about these in a second, but I'm also going to queue this the regular way, where it's just start image and give it this prompt and send it to create from there. I'm going to make only 1 video in this case because we already have these other 2 to review. So while that's going, let's take a look at what Sora made us. And this is why I'm saying I'm kind of underwhelmed with Sora, because for everything it was announced to be, it really isn't delivering on that. It will make these weird cuts in your video that goes to a completely different scene and has nothing to do with the scene that I had given it. So yeah, that's weird. The second option, this is a little bit better. It does keep the scene throughout. And now what it's giving us is these like cars that I really don't know that they look that good, and what is happening up here behind the tree when they come through. Like, it's just a lot of weirdness. So yeah, this was using the storyboard function, and maybe it would work better if I was giving it 2 images of the same scene to transition through, but just like that, not great. And this one has generated now, and we'll see Again, Sora just making weird choices here. I don't know what this is behind these people. It does a good job of kind of going behind the tree, I guess, a little bit, although you can also see it through the leaves. And I don't know if those are supposed to be robots or what's going on. But yeah, and then at least the motion in here, because it's so minimal, is a little bit better. Although this arm goes from being on the right side to suddenly being on the left side. So yeah, that's a little bit why I am underwhelmed with Sora at the moment. Coming back to Kriya, Kling 1.6 already generated, and you can see how much better this generation is. Like, it's crazy. Like, this actually makes sense. Maybe it doesn't make a lot of sense that he's dropping the noodles on the table, but let's pretend there's maybe a plate there or something. But at least the movements actually do look realistic. And that's what's cool about Kling. Compared to so far the ones that we've reviewed, you can see that Kling is operating really well. And now I'm going to run the Kling Pro. Take into account that this one, I could also use the beginning and end frame, and I could also do the 5 or 10 seconds. Kling 1.0 Pro, as you can see, is probably the one that takes the longest out of these. It says it should be on par with O1 Live, but in my experience, both Klings are a little bit slower than what it says on here. But again, very worth it for the results that we're getting. And here's the result from Kling 1.0 Pro. And as you can see, the movement is not as good as the one in Kling 1.6, but what Kling Pro does give you almost always, I think in all the examples I've done, it does give me some camera motion, which 1.6 just doesn't do it. It stays locked to where it was. I don't know if maybe prompting for some camera movement would be helpful there, but yeah, there's a lot more life in what these characters are doing, even if they don't fully move like humans, especially she looks a little bit robotic. But if instead of that, you want less motion on your subject maybe, but you do want a little bit of that camera movement and maybe some handheld camera movement, as we'll see later, using 1.0 Pro is a lot better for that. So now that we've walked through how to use all the different models, let's see how they compare to each other using the 3 different styles. Okay, so we're going to take a look at each one of the animations model by model. And at the top, I'll have what model I'm using and the specs of the generation as well. And down at the bottom, I also have the reference image that I used for each one. Our first model is Halo, which has some pretty good movement, and it comes out at 720p, 25 frames per second. Then we have Kling 1 Pro, and as we said before, this one introduces some camera shake and some camera motion, as well as the animation is also really, really solid. When it comes to Kling 1.6, again, we have that camera locked, but the motions are very good, and we don't see any of that weird kind of ghosting that we see from other motions and other AIs. For example, comparing it back to Halo, you see how the hands are very soft and they get blurry on the sides. However, when you get to Kling 1.6, the movements are very good. Luma also does a good job. It's getting some weirdness in there with the mouth that seems like it wants to kind of talk, but it doesn't. But we do have a little bit of camera movement. The prompt for this one was a space ape that was repairing a spaceship. None of these really did what I wanted them to do, but they do seem like they're fidgeting with some sort of device and trying to fix it. Our Kling 1.0 model is the one that gets the closest to seeing that repairing of the ship, because he then reaches over and kind of is touching some machine that's over there. Although Luma is not bad, nothing is really happening in the frame. It's just some slight motion, and it's not even that realistic. So this one didn't do too great. We do get up to 1024p at 24 frames per second, which is very good. But you can also see that the colors are kind of washed out a little bit and not as good. Now, looking at Sora, this one has the most movement out of all of them. But again, like what we've kind of said about Sora is that it's a little bit underwhelming. It's not delivering on what we were supposed to get. First of all, the colors on the suit just change when he moves from one side to the other. And then suddenly he's wearing a full white suit, which is kind of annoying to me. He maybe is reaching over to kind of try and fix the spaceship, which was our prompt, but still, I'm just not loving what I'm getting from this. And just to show you, I did run this twice when I did it, and this second option from Sora was even worse. It does that whole AI cut thing that it likes to do sometimes, where it just cuts to a completely different scene. And yes, it is maybe closer to the prompt, which is a white ape-like alien wearing a spacesuit and sci-fi gear repairing a spaceship. Maybe that's what Sora's trying to give us here, but there's too much inconsistencies when it comes to what he's wearing, that later like a leg appears and stuff. And in general, just not as good as other models are off the bat. And considering that I have a very limited amount of tokens for Sora for being on the $20 plan, I don't think this is doing much for us. Now moving over to O1 Live, and this one also has some audio in there, which is kind of eerie and okay. It does do a little bit of the blurring on the hands when he looks like he's tinkering with whatever he has in his hand. But overall, it's very good. O1 Live is the model that they recommend for animating people. And it does give our ape this sort of like very like lifelike expression when he moves his head to the side, like he saw something or heard something. We are back at 720p for this one. And the colors do look a little bit washed out in comparison to our reference image. But overall, I really do like this model a lot. And finally, we take a look at Runway, which also I generated audio for. The audio is kind of eerie and weird. Maybe if I'd given a more comprehensive prompt, the audio would have been created a little bit different, but I don't dislike it. There seems to be a little bit of music in there and some weird sci-fi alien voice as well. The generation here is really good. I do like this camera movement that it's giving us, but not a lot is happening in the frame. Our character isn't really animating. He's just kind of standing there. A lot of the AI videos that we see online are kind of like this. It's just generated frames, and then there's a little bit of slight movement on it to make some sort of trailer or something like that. So if that's what you're going for, I think Runway is a really good model to use. But again, if we do want some more motion and something more lifelike, we would choose one of the other models. Moving on to our kind of like 3D toy style. This is not fully anime, but it has more of that like 3D vibe and this isometric view of a little village. And we're going to take a look at how all the different models did with this one. Halo does a pretty good job. There's some movement back there in some of the cars, and the people do look like they're moving, but they don't fully look like people. They are just kind of blobs that are moving around. This could be fixed with a little bit of upscaling, but overall, there's a lot of brokenness in here in the frame. You can kind of tell, other than what was already established, like the cars down here and the buildings that are staying consistent, there's still weirdness in the warpiness. And we are generating this at 720p, so it makes sense that small details like that wouldn't look as good. For our next model, we are looking at Kling 1.0, which also generated this audio with it, which is kind of cute. But overall, I really like this a lot. Again, Kling is giving us a camera move in the generation instead of being static. And although there's not a lot of movement, and some of the movement is weird, like it looks like tiny little white cars and stuff, it is showing me a whole part of this village city, which is in the same style and wasn't in my original image. So that's pretty interesting that it is really good at moving the camera and generating the stuff that aren't in view in your reference image. This one, in my opinion, is really good, although it does struggle with the style a little bit, I think. Instead of that, when we look at Kling 1.6, you can see there's no camera motion whatsoever. We're still locked into our frame, but now there's a lot more motion, especially in these tiny little people. And I think maybe I see a couple of dogs or bicycles running around. They're not very well generated because they are so small in the frame, and we are at 960. Maybe something that upscaling could help us fix. Comparing this to Kling, the colors are a little bit more washed out, but the movement in it is a lot better. Now we're looking at Luma, which gives us a little bit of a camera movement, and it is generating parts of the city that we didn't have in our reference image, but it's just not as good as what Kling 1.0 was doing when it was generating some of the buildings in the back. Those looked exactly like the buildings that you see here in my reference image. These new buildings that Luma is generating, just not as good, not as detailed. The color is within the color palette of what we're creating. For going from 960, which is Kling 1.0, to 1024p, I would expect a lot more detail in these buildings to look better. So yeah, Luma, not really my favorite in this case. We're back at taking a look at Sora, and honestly, this one's a really good generation for the other results that I've gotten with Sora. It does have that weird AI thing where things seem to go either walking backwards or cars are going in the opposite direction. But overall, we have a little bit of a perspective change with the camera, which holds everything consistent. And we have the main cars that were in our reference image actually moving. Maybe they're not moving in the direction that we wanted, but it's not bad. I'm actually pretty happy with this one from Sora. I did generate a second one with Sora for this, and you can see this one didn't come out as good as the other one. We have almost no movement at the beginning, and then suddenly we have this very fast shift in perspective. I do love that everything it's generated is exactly in the same style as the reference image, and it fits in perfectly, not like what Luma was doing. but the motion I don't love. And this car kind of coming out of nowhere, even though it looks exactly like the other cab, which is great, it just doesn't make a lot of sense that it's coming out of the sidewalk. But these two generations in this 3D style from Sora, really good. I'm really happy with them. Now moving on to O1 Live, this is the model that's supposed to be for human movement. So it's probably not really fair to try to throw this its way, but we can see what is moving is all the figures in the scene. Now, these don't look like full characters. They're more like moving pixels and kind of the shape of characters. So this probably wouldn't be the model that I would use for something like this. The specs that it gives us, 720p, are not bad, but yeah, no, the result is not the best. And last but not least, we're going back to Runway. Again, this crops into our image to give us that landscape view, but the colors are really vibrant. The camera movement is very good. It is hallucinating like a little bit of an extra tire on the taxi I can see down there. And the people it's generating in the scene don't really look like people. I don't really know what they are. So this style might not be Runway's forte, but it's still a fairly good generation. In my opinion, the best models to use are the Kling models. From what we've seen in all of these, the quality of the movement is just really good. Again, we would use Kling 1.0 Pro if we want some of that camera movement, if we want it to generate a little bit more in our scene. And we would go over to Kling 1.6 if instead what we want is better movement of our characters. And you can see here in these three examples how these characters are moving a lot better. After the Kling models, I think my next favorite is probably O1 Live. Even though it didn't do great in our little 3D scene because the people it was creating, it is doing very well in all the other ones, specifically in the more realistic style. I think that it's giving our like Space Ape just such better movements that actually look realistic. The anime one, not so great. I would have definitely gone with Kling for that one. But O1 Live, which is also from Halo, is a really strong model. And then in third place, I would put Runway because it has actually a combination of the two best parts of the two Kling models. We have camera movement, and it's good camera movement. It looks very natural and it's subtle. It doesn't jerk around when you're making it. And there's also pretty decent movements in the rest of the frame. They're just going to be very generic movements. We're not getting really great movement in any of the styles here. I see Runway kind of coming into use more for things like B-roll, where we have a little bit of camera movement and very slow movement of our characters. Of the other models, Halo is another strong model, not my favorite. Again, I would go with Kling, but this one's not bad. Luma overall just doesn't really hit the spot. It does do pretty good with the anime style with not a lot of movement, but in our other two styles, it's not doing great. Looking at Sora again, it's made a mess of almost everything I've given it, except for the 3D style. It did surprisingly well with that one. The other two, I'm just not impressed. I'm not impressed with the cherry blossoms that aren't falling down in our anime style. I'm not impressed with it changing how our Space Ape's suit looks in either of the generations that I've made for this. So yeah, unfortunately, after all the hype that we heard, I just have to say that Sora wasn't all that impressive. Of all the services that we've seen, I am going to continue to use Kriya because I like that it gives me the difference in all these models. And now that I've tested them out a little bit, I kind of have a feeling for which model I would choose from within Kriya for whatever result I'm looking for. But if I had to choose a specific one and be able to use all their different features, I would go with Kling for sure right now. And this is AI. It might all change within a day or two, and we might have the next Sora model that might be amazing, or we might have a new player come into the field. Right now, VO2 from Google looks really promising for video as well. It's in closed beta, so I haven't been able to test it yet, but as soon as I can get my hands on it, I'll take a look at how it does with our scenes as well. And that's everything. I hope that you enjoyed the video. I hope that you got to learn a little bit about the different models and see which one might work the best for you. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out or leave any comments or anything like that, and hope to see you soon.